You're listening to the Behind Every Employer podcast with your hosts Anson Green and Jeffrey Abramowitz. On the Behind Every Employer podcast, we sit down with future-focused employers and innovators who are advancing talent development for the frontline workforce that drives business. These leaders are challenging the status quo of education and training and delivering scalable solutions. Discussions cross the intersections of adult education, digital resiliency, training innovations, and other topics important to the new American workforce. This podcast is being brought to you by the Coalition on Adult Basic Education and sponsored by Engine, a carefree-focused virtual English language platform for organizations and employers working with immigrants and refugees. Listen to the Behind Every Employer podcast on Apple, Google, Spotify, YouTube, and you can find us at coa.org. And now, here are your hosts, Anson Green and Jeffrey Abramowitz.
Hello, Anson. How are you?
Hey, how's it going, Jeff? Good to see you.
It's good to see you. What's going on?
Well, I'm trying to not completely melt down here in Texas. You know, it's been 100 degrees for about 2 weeks, and we only have 3 months left. So the summer. So I'm hoping to survive out here. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. Not as hot. We're here in Pennsylvania, and we're not as hot. We're in our low 90s and high 80s here. But everything good out there?
Oh yeah, doing great. Yeah, totally enjoying the summer. Got a lot of interesting things happening at work. I wanted to tell you, I'm going into, I work at Tyson Foods, and we are getting into something. I think it's going to be a story I want to continue to tell on the podcast as it develops. But like most manufacturers, for the last few decades, honestly, but really speeding up recently, we're implementing a lot more automation and robotics into our processes. And I am finding some interesting work when it comes to helping transition our frontline workforce at Tyson, which is largely immigrant and refugee, low-skilled workforce, often not very digitally literate, getting them kind of building some onboarding and training models to get them more comfortable working alongside robots. It's about being safer. It's about being more productive and moving things in a more efficient way. But this kind of a psychological concept of saying, now you're working next to this robot. How does that interaction? And then there's the whole upskilling of helping them learn how to use some of the basic functions. It's not super sophisticated work, but it's a really dramatic, different way of doing the job. So some job task analysis, really digging into what this job looks like. There's just not a lot of big body of literature on automation and ESL, for example. So we're really kind of cutting our teeth on some new stuff. So it's just been really exciting.
That's pretty cool. So I got one for you. All right, here's my update for you is I got 4 words. So these are my 4 words for the day. Turn the chair around. So here's what happened. I was flying out to Albuquerque to speak at an audience and in a keynote. And I was called up right before they let everybody in. I had the staff at the hotel turn every seat in the entire room around. It was facing the other way, so they couldn't see the stage. And so I got up to speak that day, and my point was this. When I got up to speak, every single chair in that entire audience was now facing me. And my point was really simple. It was that they saw something was wrong, and they took an action to make a difference, to change it, right? They did something so simple. And I pointed it out to every single one of them. I said, you did something. And it comes is in response to something you said with the crisis that happened in Uvalde. The fact that, we look at our legislative, the things that happen in our legislature, gun reform, opioid epidemics, workforce development issues. And we know that there's so many things that are wrong, and yet some of them, it just takes an action. Just turn the darn chair around. Just stand up and say, this just doesn't make sense. Like, I can't sit and listen to this guy with my back towards him, right? And that's the way we should be thinking about some of these things. So I was all excited because I was afraid I got into the audience, everybody would be facing the other way, but it didn't work that way. Everybody actually faced me, and so my big play today is really about turning the chair around, and we should all be thinking about about taking those little steps of action steps that can make change happen. So I'm really excited about our guest today and having this discussion as well.
Yeah, well, we've got a workforce powerhouse and really a huge change agent for in so many different facets with Jaime Fall joining us today. Let me tell you a little bit about, I mean, this guy's resume is just beautiful. He's just recently transitioned to a new job as strategic director for the Economic Development Collaborative in Ventura County, California, leading up a big digital upskilling initiative. And here we go again. Digital seems to come up in every one of our episodes. I met Jaime when he was director of UpSkill America at the Aspen Institute. And this was really, I mean, I got involved probably 2 years ago. It was one of the first business groups I actually really got involved in when I took my job at Tyson. So I got really thrust into kind of new discussions, new people, met some great folks. In fact, I think we're going to have to give Jaime a finder's fee because two of our guests that have been on the podcast, Valentine Quinlan and Hal Den, are both on the committee that I was on with Jaime. So we owe him a $20 bill or something at the end of the podcast there for those great guests that we had.
So Anson, why don't we bring Jaime in?
All right, I can't wait to get this guy on the screen. Hey, Jaime, how's it going?
Hi, great, Anson. How are you doing?
Looking good. It looks like the sun's setting out there behind you. Is this at your new place?
This is it. This is my new backyard.
Oh
Loving
my
it.
gosh, man.
Oh, that is awesome.
Beautiful, beautiful. Don't get us too jealous here. You know, we are dealing with heavy heat here in Texas, and you're out there with this cool breeze coming in. So Jaime, we are thrilled to have you on today. As I mentioned, we owe you a $20 bill for the great guests you supplied the show in the past. They've been fantastic, and we're thrilled to have you on because you've just got such a great background in workforce development and digital things that we've just seemed to come back around on this podcast over and over. It seems like a vibe in our various employer partners that come on talking about digital kind of revolutions and upskilling that are happening in the workplace. So thrilled to have you on. You're going to have a lot to share for our audience today. And you've got this new job, and it really intrigues me. And I got to say, I'm a little jealous because I love the topic of economic development. When I was in Texas, I did a good bit of that on the skills side, and found that when we worked with our economic development partners at the state level and local levels, especially with the bigger companies, a lot of the big dividing line on site selection had to do with the skills of the community and the availability of upskilling resources, meaning good colleges, good education, things like that. Tell us a little bit about your new job, like what you think that venture is going to be like. It's kind of a big switch for you after being at Aspen.
Thank you, Anson. Yes, no, I'm so excited about it. I'd love to talk about it. I appreciate the opportunity. So I have just joined the Economic Development Collaborative in Ventura County, California, where I'm now living. And I'm really excited, but it's not as big of a change as you might think. It is an economic development organization, but I'm going to be leading workforce development initiative for them. I'm going to be workforce and economic strategies director for the EDC. Great. And the work I'm going to be doing is they received a $5 million grant from the state for a digital upskilling initiative. So I'm going to be leading that for them. Really excited about it. As you know, Anson, it's close to a lot of the things that we've talked about. And I have a chance to put together an initiative from the very beginning that really focuses on three different populations. People who really have no digital skills. Think of people who can't save a computer file, may not be able to use a mouse. Just very basic computer skills are needed. And then another group is people who are already employed, but they need to upskill their digital skills in order to be able to either continue doing their job well or to move into a better job. And then the third cohort, which was actually really new to me, is entrepreneurs and small business people. So what the county learned during COVID was that there were so many small business owners who couldn't even apply for federal assistance online because they didn't have the computer skills.
Yep.
There were also lots of restaurants here in Ventura County where the owners couldn't connect with Grubhub because they didn't have digital skills, or they couldn't market. Maybe they were downtown somewhere and depended on foot traffic. People in the local offices didn't really need to do much social media marketing, but all of a sudden that traffic was gone. They had to connect, they had to get word out about their restaurant, and they didn't have the digital skills to do that. So those are the three groups of people we're going to be focused on, and we're really hoping to help through this initiative. It's a 3-year initiative. The goal is that this would be a pilot that could be adopted by the state, but you know me, I'm not thinking too small. I want this to be an initiative that can really help shine some light on some things that can be done nationally.
Wow, I love that. We're going to have to bring you back, I'm sure, to hear more about how this rolls out. And man, you really struck my heart about the entrepreneurial side of it. Here in San Antonio, we ran into that and lost some of the best taco shops in town because they could not, set up an online point of sale and deal with all of that. And actually, the newspaper did some great reporting on that here. So you're in that's going to be it's an enviable place to be. So congratulations, and we look forward to hearing more about that. But I want to go back to UpSkill America, where we met, where you did so much fine work, and just kind of, can you take our audience back to the beginning of UpSkill America, and the foundations, and kind of what you did there over the 7 years you were there?
Sure. To go back to the very beginning, it was like 2014. And I had a lot of people that I knew really well in the Obama administration working at either the Department of Labor, Department of Commerce, or, they're in the White House. And they contacted me and were really concerned that the recession of 2008 was really a distant memory for anybody who was, a high wage earner. But people who were earning low wages, it was still like 2008. Opportunity was gone. Wages weren't going up. Chances to advance in the workplace really weren't happening. And, and maybe, one of the worst things that had happened is companies had completely flattened their education and training budgets. Right? Companies were doing whatever they could to meet their numbers, and just really slash those education and training budgets. And so many people were being let go and, laid off that there was reduced need for education and training programs as well during that. So, it was kind of a bleak time, but I was working with an association that represented chief human resource officers of really large companies. And we started a conversation with the White House. They just didn't feel like any training was going on within corporate America anymore. And they weren't wrong, but, they didn't understand really the nuances of what was happening. If you think of a company like Boeing, they spend $1 billion a year on education and training, right? Their training budget hadn't been slashed. They were oversubscribed to their training budget, as they always were. But what we really needed to understand was where training was happening, where it wasn't happening, and who was receiving the benefit of it, and try to fix what was wrong with the system. So without like really long setup, and sorry about that, and Jeffrey, what we did is we started talking to companies about what was happening with education and training, and we all kind of arrived at the same place. Some companies were still spending a lot of money on education and training when it was important to them, but not enough companies were. And those that were spending a lot of money, or any money in some cases, the education and training was really not evenly distributed. If you had a bachelor's degree, you still had access to a tuition reimbursement program if you wanted to go back and get your MBA, or you wanted to go back and get a law degree. But if you were a frontline or entry-level worker earning lower wages, you didn't have the resources to front a semester of college and then wait to get reimbursed while you were having to pay the second semester of college tuition. So it was really, there was a lot of discrepancy in who was getting education and training. And a lot of really inequality being created as a result of it. So that's kind of what happened. And then in January of 2015, President Obama, the day after his State of the Union address, spoke to employers and called on them to really do more to invest in the upskilling of their workforce. And UpSkill America was created at the Aspen Institute as part of the Economic Opportunities Program.
Cool.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's so funny when you think at the historical, you really have to have a historical lens to see how the economy has shifted since the Great Recession. And I've heard these statistics from economists about how it did take, 10 years to come back, especially in some sectors of the workforce to that kind of workforce that you had in prior to the Great Recession. So I love that historical perspective. And now looking back with the pandemic and that kind of disruption, what we'll see, maybe 5 years out or 10 years out from now, because you really need that historical perspective. But you were right in the weeds there. In the Obama administration, I remember the TAC grants. I mean, that was the largest investment in workforce development in history. I think it was like $2 billion at the time. It was tremendous. So I was at a community college at the time. So great work as a foundation. And Aspen does such fine work in kind of bringing those resources together. So tell me, like, while you were there in the thick of it, it sounds just very super engaging. But what did you learn during your time there? Tell me kind of what your takeaway now with some reflection.
So I think I would. Well, there are a couple of different ways I could answer that, Anson. One of them is your question's kind of overwhelming, frankly, right? Because I feel like every day I'm on the phone with an employer, I learn something. You pick up that thing that you go home and over the dinner table, you want to tell your family, you won't believe what I learned today. And it's just been like 7 years of that, and it's been fantastic. I've really loved it. Let me tell you what happened to me yesterday. As like one example of this, okay? So I'm on the phone with someone I consider a fairly high-level executive with a really name brand company in America. And we're on a Zoom call, and most of the way through the Zoom call, he says, "Oh, hang on just a minute, I gotta take this call." So he goes offline for a second, comes back, and he said, that was my boss. We're working through bringing people back into the office. And what we've learned is none of the technology back in the office works anymore. He said, we've invested so much money in the distributed workforce and making sure everyone has, current technology, access to Zoom, whatever it might be. He said, we haven't invested anything in like 4 years back in the office. He said, none of that equipment works anymore. We're going to have to figure out, what we're doing about that. The equipment's old, like nobody remembers the passwords of anything. It's just all this stuff, and it's like, oh, that's rich, right? I mean, that's like a really valuable piece of information right there. Thinking about all of the companies going back to work and nothing's going to work for them.
Well, yeah, and do they want to make the investments, knowing that the shift in the workforce in terms of like where they want to work, and should we just go ahead and make the leap and do the work from home or some mixed scheduling or something? But yeah, that's fascinating, because they've just they're just paying the bills on what they had to invest in technology during the pandemic.
And they're all like involved in trying to get people back into the office, right? Don't you want to be back in the office and see all your coworkers and everyone comes back in, and it's like, well, my desktop is like 4 years old or whatever, I can't use that. And, the Wi-Fi is not as good as what I have at home. And, gas is $6 an hour. I don't want to drive in. And, all these things that really play into how do we get the workforce back in place, I hadn't even thought about till that call yesterday.
Absolutely.
So that's just the tiniest example of like every day, I could like go home and go, wow, that's really interesting.
Well, thinking about your work there, I mean, let's stay on the digital piece. because you've got this new exciting job that I'm still thinking about how envious I am. But really, like, what did you learn when it comes to digital during your time there? Because that was a really exciting time. And those discussions that I was on in the employer work group were fascinating to me. But I know you did studies the time you were there and stuff. What are some takeaways that are kind of helping inform your future focus?
Yeah, so thank you for asking that.
Yeah.
So it was like March of 2020, and right, my work had focused on education and training and what employers were doing, right, and how you expand education and training for frontline and entry level workers. And this like massive layoff and recession hits again. And I'm sorry, but my mind went straight back to 2008, right? Companies are going to slash their education and training budgets.
Yeah.
And, all of these programs that I've been like working on and encouraging employers to do are all going to go away. And so I started picking up the phone, talking to the employer partners that we had. And what I found was education and training had never been more important. The safety protocols were changing. Companies were having to rethink the way they did things in the workplace. And I realized that this was an incredibly rich area that needed to be studied about how COVID was changing the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
And so, so thankful. We reached out to Strata Education Network and also Walmart. They were really interested in the topic and funded us to do a study where we looked at how COVID and also heightened attention on racial inequality were changing the workplace in 2020.
Right.
And what we learned was like really fascinating. One of the issues that quickly rose to the top was that with the increased deployment of technology in the workplace, it was just rapidly changing the skills that people needed to be successful in the workplace. And companies had changed so many processes, but what they meant by changing and reinventing processes was basically taking in-person processes and moving them online. So whether it was, no one was real, and I'm sorry, I should clarify here, I'm talking about large corporations. That's for the most part who I've worked with. So in this case, large corporations, they weren't taking paper applications anymore. Everything was online. Job interviews were happening online. Onboarding was happening online. Work was happening from home and online. So just like kind of everything was different, sweeping changes within the companies, and that they weren't really ever going to go back to the way that they used to do things. Right. So if people didn't have digital skills, they weren't going to be able to be, they weren't really going to be able to even get a job if they couldn't be successful on Zoom and go through the onboarding process.
Right.
But even if they did that, then they weren't, might not be successful on the job because of so much technology being rolled out in the workplace. So, that was really kind of the biggest underlying current of everything that we learned. And as you know, Anson, since then, we partnered with our friends at the Digital Us, part of World Education, to create an employer network advancing digital skills and equity, where we're bringing together a peer learning network of employers who are really concerned about these digital skills and looking about what skill needs are developing and what training they need to try to build those skills and all the things that go around a training program to make sure people want to be in it, people can be successful in it, and then people benefit from it once it's over.
Right.
Yeah, Jamie, I gotta jump in for a second, because one of the things that we saw too was we didn't realize what we didn't realize. Like, we would give people digital technology and we would give them the hardware and give them the laptops or the pads, right, that they needed to get some jobs done, and then we not only do we have to skill them to do it, but we let them take it home, and then we'd realize we taught them a week later and they'd say, well, I got it, but I don't have access. So it wasn't just about the hardware and giving them the computer. It was about getting them on it. And then getting them on it, it was like, well, we can get on it, but, my kids are on it because they're all at home. And during COVID, they're all in class and, and home, and we don't have enough computers at home. So they're using that computer. So I don't log on till like 10 o'clock at night, when they're asleep already, because that's happening. But the point that you make about that I call it diversity, equity, and confusion, because we're all kind of confused about what to do. And when it comes to the digital divide, it actually it got larger for a large section of our population. Those people that are on poverty, that are really are marginalized populations that just didn't have that skill set and didn't have access, and they didn't have and we're starting to come back into that now. We're starting to really concentrate, and thank God, programs like yours that really are concentrating on solving some of that digital divide that's getting out there. And I know at some point we're hopefully going to get to talk about this today, but the Digital Literacy Act and Digital Equity Act and its implementation and how that's going to affect your work coming up. But thanks so much for bringing that up. And I think it's a big piece of the work that we all do, the three of us, and something that we got to really concentrate on doing a better job at in our country.
Absolutely. I was going to say too, Jamie, you brought up something that it's kind of in my mind for a while, and now in your new role, you're going to really be able to tackle it. And it's when you mentioned that you're mainly working with big companies, and of course, I work at a Fortune 100 company. So, I think there's almost kind of a bias in like where we see the ideas and the action happening with the big companies, because they're easier to get a handle on, and they're easier to like corral together, and they've got teams that work on these topics. But it seems like the small business, the growth market in our country is always the small business, the entrepreneur. And so your new job, you're going to have that little corner of it focused on that.
Awesome.
So I think that is one of the areas of the digital story that hasn't been adequately told and mapped. And, what is the workforce development strategy for a business of 23 people, when it comes to taking your restaurant online, all those kind of things. Who does that work, in the community? Because when you multiply it by the number of small businesses in the community, it's going to clobber any of the big companies in town in terms of sheer numbers of workers. But it's really not something that you see published about. It's just not as big a presence. Any thoughts about that little dynamic between the giant companies, the large companies, and then the small mom and pops and the entrepreneurs?
Anson, I just think about how great the need is.
Yeah.
And, some of the stories I already hear locally about, company that, they hire new employees, and they get people on their email system, and they get them logged into their network, and they do things like that. But it wasn't until recently they realized they weren't taking anyone out of the network.
Yeah.
Everyone who had left the company still had access to all of the files. Yeah. And, there are just so many, when you think of a small business, right? And my wife and I, we've had our own consulting company for, sad to say, almost 30 years now. Can't believe we're that old. But we, you just, when you're busy and when you're growing, you're just trying to keep the lights on, right? And keep the contracts coming in and get the work done. And it's just impossible to keep up with the technology needs and the innovation and what's happening. And we're just excited to be able to step into companies, that 20 employees, 2 employees, don't care what it is, trying to help them plug some of those holes and understand how technology can really help them do more with their business. But also, I think we have a lot of work to do helping them understand the threats as well, and some of the defensive measures that they need to be taking also.
Yep. Well, and Jeff, you had mentioned the Digital Equity Act, and this is all coming together in terms of like a really nice niche area that might grow. I was on a phone call with some different public entities, one of them representing libraries, I think out of Missouri, actually. And the library network was wanting to start digital literacy classes, and I'm thinking it was going to be, for their patrons, the community members, and it was, but it was for small businesses. They said we're going to offer your kind of standard digital classes for the community, but we really need to get to our businesses on, and they were really wondering like, what should we be teaching? But Jamie, I think this idea, the security aspect of things is equally important. as it is just the usage and the email and setting up a point of sale or whatever it happens to be. So it's a fascinating niche area. I kind of want to move on here though, and we got so much to talk about. But thinking back to the network, and in reflection, that impact. What do you think are some of the biggest impacts you think you've been able to have with some reflection?
Well, Anson, let me be clear about one thing, right? So,
Yeah.
One of the maybe few really smart things that I realized early on in this job was that UpSkill America was never going to be successful because of the work of Jaime Fall, right? I didn't really have much of a budget.
Yeah.
And there was just incredibly limited impact of what I could do. I didn't have any authority to make people change things, and that it was all going to rely on putting together this network of the willing coalition, if you will, of people who really cared deeply about the frontline and entry level workers and their kind of plight and their future, and to pull that group together and see what we could all do together. So I don't have a list of here are all the great things that Jaime Fall did to change the world, but I am so proud of what the network has done over the 7 years and the companies that have come together to do it. And let me just digress for 1 second, Anson. I don't know how much of this we've talked about in the past, but affording college and getting through college financially was incredibly hard for me. I had to work overnights, and it was, I had a couple of fun years at community college where I grew up in the middle of Kansas. And then I went off to the University of Kansas, the national champions in basketball, I might add. It was just a really tough existence. I was working, like I said, overnights, didn't get to sleep much. I really have very few good memories of my couple of years at KU, sadly. But I was lucky because college wasn't really that expensive when I went, right? It was a great value for the money. And, you could still work really hard and pay your way through school. And that's what I did. But people now, there are just so many people who have no shot at college or even a meaningful industry recognized credential at this point. But now to get back to directly answering your question with that background aside, but I am so proud that I can look and know that there are easily 3 million workers who have access to an employer-funded certificate or degree paid for by their employer that didn't have access to that 7 years ago. I mean, the companies who have come together have literally created a third pathway to get a college degree for people that cost them nothing. And I just think I'm so proud of that. And I look at that and feel like that is a major change for people. I mean, we have got so far yet to come, right? Not enough people really understand this kind of network and this opportunity that's out there. Companies I don't think are doing enough to really market it. Kind of on and on. There are all kinds of things I would like to see better, but that framework is in place. And I feel like I leave now at the end of 7 years with a really fantastic person taking the reins, and feel like a lot has been accomplished.
It's fantastic. I was going to say too, I just think that this is really another podcast to come, but the higher ed, I was in a college for 7 years. I think higher ed has really got to pay attention to what's happening out there, because you have seen, for years, my whole career, businesses have complained that schools aren't producing the workers they need or the skills they need. Now businesses, are saying, okay, we're going to do this ourselves. You've seen this incredible rise of apprenticeships and all these kind of innovative models, and then you've got the student base, the people like you at KU that are now saying, I'm not going to college because of student debt. I'm foregoing this. And I feel like higher ed is really on the ropes in many ways. And coming out of that can be tough. I mean, as an industry, and that's another podcast for sure. But it's really just hits us in the face when we hear these stories and kind of look longitudinally about how long there have been kind of complaints and dissatisfaction with the higher ed models and systems.
You know what it is, Anson? It's been the reality that we have young people graduating college and just not being able to survive because of the college debt that they've incurred. And now 54% of all jobs require more than a high school diploma, but less than a college degree.
Yep.
So, maybe what we're going to start seeing is a swing the other way, where colleges start looking at those stackable credentials that really can help people get a career pathway and be successful and not incur $200,000 in college debt.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, this has been a great discussion, Jamie. We want to take you out here, and we're going to go into our lightning round now. And I want you to think about what you could charge our audience with as a call to action as we round out the show here. So, Jeff, let's go.
You got it. We are back. It's our lightning round. We all know what happens now. We're going to go around the horn and we're going to ask for something that strikes you. What do you want our audience to leave with today? That action, those action steps. Who wants to kick us off?
I'll kick it off.
All right.
This is just a reprise from previous episodes, but it's going to be with us. We referenced it in the podcast, but it's the Digital Equity Act. Our employers, our providers of education, our communities are faced with a transformative moment when it comes to federal investments in our communities to close the digital divide, both in terms of broadband and the wires and networking and the skills. And those grants are moving into the states for planning, and then there'll be implementation grants going out competitively over the next couple of years. This is the moment. The amount of money is staggering, but it's so needed. You heard the discussions we just had today about digital, but now the excuse of well, how are we going to fund this can be removed off the table, largely because of these great investments that connect our rural areas, connect our communities that are not networked and that are not digitally savvy. So somebody, and if you're listening, get involved. If you're a company, I think companies really need to make their voices heard. We've heard Jamie's great feedback from insights from small businesses all the way up to Fortune 100 companies when it comes to the digital revolution and how this is evolving and really transforming the workplace. But now we've really got some tools and funding coming out from the federal government to make those things happen. Jeff, what do you got?
So I got two. One, I want to piggyback on that because I just want to mention that the National Skills Coalition has a fact sheet that's out on the Digital Equity Act. Go on their website, pump it, just print it out. Keep it on your desk because there's some great facts in there. And more importantly, there's deadlines on there. So if your state isn't filing in time, they could be losing out on a lot of those funding opportunities. So check it out. It's on the National Skills Coalition. But I'm going to go back to the way I started the show off. And I'm going to go back to my 4 words. My 4 words were turn the darn chair around. And we got to turn the chair around. We're seeing in our country so many things happening right now. We're seeing a movement for some gun legislation around our country. We're seeing a change with opioid epidemic is just rampant and going, just causing a lot of havoc. I really think that when you see something, whether you're a legislator, a community leader in the workforce development field, or if you're just in the public, and you see something that just doesn't smell right, turn the chair around, take some little action, because it's going to take a village to solve some of our problems in our country. And I really hope that the only way it changes is if we all step up and do something about it. So I hope that you'll bear that in mind next time you walk past a homeless person and acknowledge them. They're visible, they're a part of our society, and see how you can give them a hand or help them out. Not just money, but maybe guide them to some resources and that kind of thing. So thank you for all that. And Jamie, we'll cap it off with you. Tell us, what's your lightning?
Jeff, thank you. And what a great transition. Your point about everyone just doing what they can is so valuable, also in education and training. And I would just come back to this. So, it's been a fantastic 7 years at UpSkill America. I'm so thankful to have had this position and to have been a part of the work that's gone on. But one of the things that I've seen is no matter where you are within a company, you can have some impact around the education, training, and development of the people that you work with. No matter where you are, you have a sphere of influence, and do whatever you can. When you leave your job, what you're going to be leaving behind are the people, and they're what really matters. And do whatever you can. If you can't influence your company's tuition assistance policy, or whatever it might be, pass along what knowledge you have. Help people develop, help them, grow in the workforce, help them gain networks, whatever it might be. Just do what you can where you are and try to have the most impact for the most people that you possibly can, because that's what it's all about as far as I'm concerned.
That's invigorating and inspiring, Jamie. Thank you, man. That's some great words. We are so thrilled that you joined us. Great insights. I really wish you well on this next phase. We're going to bring you back and hear more about the work you're doing out there in Ventura County. I want to thank everybody for checking out the podcast. Our sponsor, Engine, and the Coalition on Adult Basic Education have been just such great champions to help us with the podcast. Check it out at behindeveryemployer.org or on your favorite podcast app. And take us out, Jeff.
You got it. Have a good one, everybody.
All right.
You've been listening to the Behind Every Employer podcast with your hosts, Anson Green and Jeffrey Abramowitz. This podcast has been brought to you by the Coalition on Adult Basic Education and Engine, a career-focused virtual English language platform for organizations and employers working with immigrants and refugees. Listen to the Behind Every Employer podcast on Apple, Google, Spotify, YouTube, and you can find us at coabe.org. If you'd like to reach Behind Every Employer podcast, you can do so at behindeveryemployer@coabe.org.